He said, look, if this was Henry Ford, if this was a Ford Motor Company, you would all be fired because you're not processing these children fast enough. He's basically calling these migrant children widgets. And so the way he was able to speed up their placement in the United States was to just not do background checks on the sponsors.
Welcome to The Debrief, where we talk with the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the headlines they're covering this week and where the story's going next. I'm Sarah Westwood, and I'm here today with commentary editor Conn Carroll. And Conn, the Examiner wrote in an editorial this week that HHS Secretary Xavier Becerra should actually be impeached for what he's doing, or at least allowing to happen to migrant children at the border. Tell us why HHS isn't even involved with migrant children and how that's sort of leading to a lot of these kids ending up in child labor situations.
Sure. So going back to 2008, there was a law passed under President Bush that said, Will Before Trafficking Act, that said any child under the age of 18 that is not from a contiguous country, so not from Canada or Mexico, that is caught illegally crossing the border, they have to be transferred custody to HHS in order to make sure they're safe and well-being while their immigration status is being handed out. So since 2008, HHS has been involved in taking migrants arrested for illegally crossing the southern border and finding them a sponsor while their immigration status is figured out. Now, as soon as that happened, you started getting higher and higher levels of migrant children coming in because they realized that instead of being returned back to Mexico, they're being placed in the United States, which was their final destination anyways. Mm-hmm. And so in 2013, researchers at the University of Texas at El Paso did a report and said, look, if we don't change this policy, they're gonna have a crisis on our hands. And the very next summer, that's exactly what happened. Now, President Obama solved this problem by working with the President of Mexico, the then President of Mexico, to create a program to stop migrants from transversing, from going across Mexico. Then there was a new election in Mexico. The current president of Mexico was elected, and he got rid of that program. And that's when you saw the spike in 2019 under President Trump. President Trump solved this problem by doing his return to Mexico problem, which Biden ended on his first day in office. And that's why you're just having floods and floods of minor children crossing the border now, because they know Biden will finish the trafficker's job and place them where they want to go in the United States.
Does the Biden administration have any plan to sort of deal with that crisis?
Yes. Make him do it faster, which is the new report from the New York Times had these amazing quotes from Secretary Becerra saying, look, he was threatening his own staffers at HHS. You need to get these children through the system faster. He compared it to an assembly line. He said, look, if this was Henry Ford, if this was a Ford Motor Company, you would all be fired because you're not processing these children fast enough. He's basically calling these migrant children widgets. And so the way he was able to speed up their placement in the United States was to just not do background checks on the sponsors. So you had these sponsors who were sponsoring multiple children, but then basically setting them up with staffing services who would then put them in Kia factories, egg farm factories, food processing factories. So you have this huge swath of literally hundreds of thousands of migrant children working 40 hours a week, all because Secretary Becerra is not done his job and has made it easier for sponsors to fraudulently sponsor these children.
A Gallup poll that came out recently showed that the number of Americans identifying as LGBTQ has doubled in recent years. You know, so talk about sort of the significance of that finding.
Sure. So when a lot of people look at this poll, they think, oh wow, suddenly there's twice as many gay people as there were before. But when you dig in the numbers, that's not really what's there. All of the growth of people who identify as LGBT, it's all that B. If you got rid of the B, there would be no growth at all. So the percentage of especially young people identifying as bisexual has gone up. And it also, not only is it just young people, it's just young women. So you have a huge growth in the number of young women who are saying that they're bisexual. Now, an interesting thing about this is, you know, when we went through the Obergefell case and Obergefell process, there's a big push by the LGBT movement to make it seem like sexuality is set in stone, that what someone is gay or bi or whatever else, that's how they are. But the scientific literature shows that's not really true, especially for women. Women often transition in and out of lesbian identities and even more bisexual identities. The problem here is that for women, when they do transition into and out of these identities, there's a lot of kind of psychic, emotional distress with that. And so I think it's highly probable that one of the reasons you're seeing a lot more depression among young women today is because a lot more of them are questioning their own sexual identities.
The argument from people who are sort of defending this spread of, you know, of these shifting identities, say that, you know, this growth in the number of people who identify as LGBTQ comes from the fact that society is now more accepting of their identities and that they were in the shadows before. And you cited in a piece you wrote an argument about, you know, schools, when they stopped forcing left-handed children to write with their right hand, there was all of a sudden, you know, a doubling of the number of left-handed students who could be identified as such. So, you know, what's the problem with that argument?
Well, yeah, again, as I was saying before, like two things is like, one, the concentration of the growth is not, you know, equal across the sexes. It's mostly concentrated in women. And second of all, they're not always staying with that identity, right? Again, sexual identities are fluid, and bisexual identities in particular are particularly fluid. And the same is not same with right and left-handedness. I mean, there are people that are ambidextrous, true, but you know, mostly if you're writing with your left hand, you're going to be writing with your left hand your whole life.
Well, Conn, thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely.
You can get more writing from Conn and the rest of the commentary team at washingtonexaminer.com.